API just put out a new energy security framework, American energy security framework. And part of this you have in there is working with allies in the Persian Gulf to accelerate opportunities to reduce reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. How quickly can that reliance be reduced, or are we already there due to the fact that the strait was effectively closed for months?
It is not too early for us to start thinking about what we should do after this crisis is over, which is what our American Energy Security Framework is all about. It's about providing resilience for the energy system that clearly needs it. What we've seen over the course of the last 3 months with the strait being closed, of course, has been a price hike in oil. But at the same time, it's also shown us that there's a reckoning going on right now between where we get our energy and where we should be getting our energy. So the focus of our framework is really on 3 things: increasing supply here in the United States and throughout the world, building infrastructure that the world's going to need to move that energy, and finally, providing resilience to the existing energy structure. So what we're talking about is how do you build out infrastructure, not just here in the United States, but also in the Middle East, so that we don't have to traverse the strait as much as we currently do to get the products that Americans need every single day.
Okay, Mike, so let's walk through a couple of these, because your timing here is critical as we have just lived through this extended closure of the strait. And it starts here at home. With regard to securing the energy supply, you've got a couple of ideas, including upgrading the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. What do we need to do?
So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was actually developed in the late 1970s in response to the last Iranian oil crisis. Right. This was Henry Kissinger's big concept coming out of that crisis. We also formed the International Energy Agency at that time. So the SPR has not been upgraded since the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Damaged, right?
It's been damaged. In fact, every time you withdraw oil from the SPR, the infrastructure slowly breaks down. So it is in desperate need of upgrading. And what we're suggesting is we need to upgrade the SPR. We need to get the engineering right. Currently, it is supposed to be able to deliver about 4.5 million barrels of oil a day from it. It hasn't during this crisis. It's only delivered about 1 million barrels a day because the engineering needs to be upgraded significantly.
Wow.
Well, just one more question on the SPR before we move on here. It also needs to be refilled, infrastructure aside. It's hit the lowest level in 43 years. And I just wonder how quickly you really anticipate we can do that, and how it's going to compete with demand from other countries who are also trying to rebuild their own stockpiles, and with just the daily needs in this country and everywhere else.
Well, I'd also remind you that we entered this crisis at very low levels of the SPR because it was used during the previous administration, not because we were in an energy security dilemma, but really because they wanted to lower prices going into midterm elections. So we cannot be using the SPR for political purposes. It has to be in times of energy security crises, which is what we've seen over the course of the last few months. We're at record lows now because of the near 9 million barrels a week that we have been withdrawing from it. So it is now is the time, particularly when we're dealing with lower prices. We should start thinking about upgrading the reserve and how we refill it in a timely manner.
Really interesting. That includes as well new offshore leasing, expanded access in the Gulf, and ensuring reliable fuel supply through what you call a functional renewable fuel standard. What is that?
Well, currently the renewable fuel standard, which of course is the way we provide ethanol or put ethanol in gasoline, what we've actually proposed is a system where we're no longer providing what are called small refinery exemptions to mid-sized refiners, which is essentially a bailout to refiners that aren't able to function with the RFS in place. And in exchange for a relook at the RFS, we're proposing that we actually have E15 ethanol, 15% ethanol within the gasoline fleet. So this is a proposal that has made its way through the United States House of Representatives. It's something that the United States Senate should consider now as well.
I would just point out that President Trump just touched down in Pennsylvania, where he'll be speaking later this afternoon. He's gaggling with reporters right now, and if he brings any newsworthy comments, we will bring that to our audience. But of course, this is a president in Pennsylvania, which obviously is a robust energy state in many ways. It is a president who campaigned in part on drill, baby, drill, unleashing American energy, cutting regulatory red tape, and permitting reform is part of that. It's also one of your ideas here. This is a discussion, it feels like, we've been having in Washington forever.
For decades.
Is this time any different?
I certainly hope so. And I give the president a lot of credit for focusing on American production. We're now producing more oil and natural gas than we ever have in the history of this country. And by the way, the more oil and gas than any country has ever produced in the history of the world. And a lot of that has to do with the president's policies that he's advanced. But the one big thing that's missing is comprehensive permitting reform done by Congress in a bicameral way. So we're working with both sides of the aisle to get this accomplished. And I will say, President Trump has done everything that he can do from the executive branch, and the courts have done everything that they've done with 3 major Supreme Court decisions. The only branch that hasn't acted is Congress. But we're hopeful that in the month of July, with the negotiators that are at the table now, including Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia and Martin Heinrich from New Mexico and Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, that the Senate can actually finally pass a bill that gets enacted into law.
Well, to your point, after all the talk, that would be quite a moment. Mike, strengthening resilience in supply chains, you point out, and I think Kayleigh already highlighted this, working with allies in the Gulf to accelerate opportunities that reduce reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. After everything we just went through, what do we need? More pipe, more storage, or just staying away from that part of the world?
Well, here is the key. If it weren't for the infrastructure that the Saudis and the Emiratis put into place in advance of this crisis, we would be in a much different position. Prices would be much higher. Thankfully, they put in a major pipeline, the East-West pipeline through Saudi, another major pipeline through UAE. Both of them are talking about expanding those pipelines right now as lifelines to get around the Strait of Hormuz. I expect that investment's going to continue. What I'm suggesting, and what API is suggesting in this plan, is that to the extent that they need assistance in building out that infrastructure, the Export-Import Bank and other resources here from the federal level should be there, because we're still very reliant on, and the world is reliant on, those products that are coming out of the Arabian Gulf. So that's one idea that we've advanced. But in addition to that, I think we need to really focus on advancing Western Hemisphere energy. That means, yes, ensuring that we have the resources that we need here in the United States in places like Alaska and North Dakota, and of course the prolific Permian Basin and the Gulf of America. But in addition to that, there are huge oil plays happening right here in the Western Hemisphere that are very exciting. Exxon and Chevron, for example, are in Guyana. Argentina is increasingly becoming an important play. Venezuela. Where we were only importing about 100,000 barrels a day from Venezuela before we went in to get Maduro, now we're importing almost 500,000 barrels a day. That's where we should focus, on the North-South alliance, not the East-West alliance.